The capture and the fear Mason worked the night shift on the outer deck of the Orion cargo station. The air was dry, the hum of generators steady as a heartbeat, and the light panels flickered in the corners like tired eyes. He was checking a crate. Shipment marked food rations level 3 when he heard a faint scratching sound. It was so light it could have been a wire slipping or a rat, but when he leaned closer the sound stopped. He frowned and unlatched the crate lid. Steam rolled out from the cooling packs, and among sealed packets of nutrient gel, he saw movement, something tiny, trembling between two silver pouches. At first he thought it was a malfunctioning cleaning drone, but then he saw her. She was small, barely the size of his thumb. Her skin shimmered like soft green glass, and her eyes glowed faint gold in the dim light. She was clutching a piece of torn fabric that looked like it came from a miniature uniform. She looked up at him with sheer terror, and let out a sound that was too soft to be a scream but too full of fear to be silence. Mason froze. The station had strict rules about alien life forms, especially unregistered ones, but something about the way she looked made him hesitate. The tiny alien girl stumbled backward, almost tripping over the gel pack. She pointed a trembling hand at him and said in a tiny voice distorted through fear, "You will eat me." Her words hit Mason like a slap. He blinked and stammered, "What? No. Why would I eat you?" But she covered her face and began to shake. Mason lifted both his hands, palms open to show peace, and knelt down slowly like someone trying not to scare a wild animal. Hey, slow down," he said softly. "I am not going to hurt you. What is your name?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Leary, my name is Leary. Please do not cook me." Mason almost laughed but held it back. He could see she was dead serious, and that realization hit him harder than any punch could. Someone had told her stories about humans, stories that painted them as monsters. Maybe she had been taken by smugglers, maybe she had seen her people eaten. Mason shook his head. No one deserves that kind of fear. He took a slow breath and said, "Leary, listen, I am not like that. I fix machines, not cook people." Leary peeked through her fingers, her glowing eyes darting to the open crate around her. She saw the nutrient packs labeled human consumption and backed up again. "You have food already. Why do you need me?" she said, voice trembling. Mason sighed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a sugar cube from his coffee kit. He placed it on the crate floor and stepped back. "Here. See this? It is sweet. Try it. I promise it will not hurt you." Leary hesitated, sniffing the air. The scent of sugar seemed to break through her panic. She touched it with her tiny fingers, then took a bite. Her eyes widened, and for the first time she looked less like a hunted creature. Mason smiled. "There you go," he said gently. "See, no eating, you just sugar and peace." She blinked up at him, the edges of her wings quivering, and whispered softly, "You speak kind, but humans lie." Mason nodded. "Maybe some do, but not me." He could see she was cold, her little arms wrapped around herself. He grabbed a clean cloth from his tool belt and folded it into a square, then placed it near her. She climbed onto it, shivering less now. Her eyes darted across the bay as if searching for escape routes. He noticed small scars on her arms, fine silver lines that looked like she had been held by restraints. Mason felt anger coil in his gut. Those smugglers, they must have trapped her with others. "Where are your people?" he asked. She looked down. "Gone, taken. The big ones came with nets and light. They said we were property." Mason clenched his fists. "Damn," he muttered, not realizing she heard. Leary looked at him curiously. "You are angry, not at you," he said quietly. "At them. The ones who did this." She tilted her head. "Why would you care?" "Human." Mason looked away. "Because no one should be caged. Because you look scared, and I hate that." Before Leary could respond, the station intercom blared, "Alert, unauthorized vessel approaching Dock 4. Mason's heart dropped. That was the same dock this shipment had come from. The smugglers were back. Leary jumped, her tiny wings spreading slightly. She looked terrified again. "They come for me," she cried. Mason didn't think twice. He scooped the cloth up gently, folding it around her like a cocoon, and tucked her into the inner pocket of his jacket. "Hold on," he whispered. He closed the crate and straightened up. Footsteps echoed down the metal corridor. 2 security drones hovered near the door, and behind them Mason saw 3 figures in worn cargo suits, their faces half covered by masks. The lead one smirked evening. "Tech having trouble with our shipment?" Mason forced a smile, his hand resting casually near the crate, just doing routine checks. He said, smooth voice, steady. Even though his pulse raced, the smuggler's eyes glinted sharp and cruel. "We think you might have found something of ours." Leary could feel Mason's heartbeat thundering through his chest where she hid. She wanted to scream, but forced herself to stay still. Mason took a breath and said, "Nothing of yours here, pal. Just rations and dust." The smuggler took a step forward and Mason noticed the pistol on his belt. Low-powered but deadly at this range. The air between them tightened heavy enough to choke the light. Leary whispered softly in his pocket, "Please do not let them take me." Mason's jaw tightened and he whispered, barely moving his lips, "I will not." The smuggler leaned closer, ready to push past Mason when the dock alarm triggered again. Flashing red across the corridor, another ship requesting clearance. The smugglers cursed under their breath and stepped back. "We will be back, Tech. Make sure our crate is untouched." Mason nodded, pretending to relax as they left. The moment their footsteps faded, he pulled the cloth from his pocket. Leary peeked out, eyes wide and shining. "Are they gone for now?" he said. Voice low, "But we need to move fast. This station isn't safe for either of us anymore." As they slipped into the maintenance tunnels, Mason could feel Leary's tiny hand grip his collar. And for the first time she whispered something, not filled with fear but with fragile hope. "You are strange for a human." Mason smiled, just doing what humans do best. He said, "Fixing broken things." And with that they disappeared into the humming metal maze of the station, leaving behind the crate that had once been her cage and a trail that would soon lead danger straight to them. A deal between unequals. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and warm, the air buzzing with the hum of wires and the soft hiss of steam as Mason crouched and crawled through the dim passage, his tool belt clinking softly against the metal walls. Leary clung to his collar, her tiny hands gripping the fabric, her wings folded tight against her back. She could feel every shudder of his muscles, every deep breath he took. She did not understand this human who risked so much for her kind. Her elders had always told stories of giant creatures who ate little ones for strength. But this one only carried her carefully and spoke softly, as if afraid she might break. Mason stopped at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 paths. He took out a small light from his belt. The beam swept across the pipes and cables, then down toward a maintenance tag scratched with age Dock 4 power relay. "This way," he whispered. He had to get her somewhere safe before those smugglers checked the logs. Leary peered out from his collar, her glow faintly lighting the metal around them. Her eyes shimmered with worry. "They will come for me again," she said softly. Mason nodded. "Yeah, probably, but we will be ready this time." She tilted her head. "Will you help me?" Mason grinned. "You think I'm crawling through grease and wires for fun?" They reached a hatch that opened into the lower service deck. Mason pushed it open and stepped out. Into the dim light, the deck was quiet except for the gentle hum of the main reactor. Deep below, he found his workshop tucked behind old cargo panels and crates. The smell of oil and burnt circuits hung in the air, and a pile of half-fixed drones lay on the counter. He set Leary down gently on the table. She stood on the metal surface, eyes wide, staring at everything, as if the whole human world were strange and beautiful. Mason rummaged through drawers, pulling out spare components, bits of wire, a tea-tin and old chip box. He stacked them carefully, creating a small space that resembled a tiny shelter. He lined the floor with a piece of soft cloth and placed a light strip overhead so it glowed like a warm sun. "There you go," he said, "your own little home." Leary walked inside, slowly touching the walls of her new shelter. She turned to him, puzzled. "Why do this?" Mason shrugged. "Because everyone deserves a safe place." Leary watched him closely, her mind racing with questions. Humans were dangerous. Everyone on her planet knew that they had fire ships and thunder weapons, and they took what they wanted. Yet this one made her a home out of scraps. She could not decide if he was foolish or brave. Maybe both. She stepped closer and said, "My people live in trees that sing. We hear their heartbeats and they tell us where to grow." Mason smiled. "That sounds peaceful." It was until the big ships came. They cut the trees. The singing stopped. Mason looked down ashamed, even if he had not been part of that past he carried its shadow. You said the big ones took your clan. Do you know where they are? She shook her head. The smugglers sold them, maybe far, maybe near. I can feel them sometimes in dreams but never see them. Mason clenched his fists under the table, thinking of those cargo crates he had unloaded hundreds over the years, some labeled scrap, some frozen goods. He wondered how many had been alive once. The workshop lights flickered. A moment later, a red warning blinked across his console. Unauthorized access to dock logs. Mason's heart jumped. They were already tracing the shipment someone had paid off security. His name would be next on the list. He turned to Leary. All right, little one, we need to move again. This place won't be safe much longer. Leary looked up, fear flashing in her golden eyes again. Where will we go? Mason thought quickly. The only place with enough blind spots was the vent network, the maze that even drones avoided. He grabbed his tool pack and opened a grate on the wall. The air that came out was warm and smelled faintly of ozone. Leary hesitated. She had lived her whole life in open forest canopies. The tight metal tunnels scared her, but Mason's steady gaze made her nod. She climbed onto his shoulder and they slipped inside the vent. The metal vibrated under their hands and feet. Leary pressed her palm to the wall and whispered a low note like a hum. Mason turned his head. What are you doing? She whispered. Metal listens, it tells me where it is strong, where it will fall. The note changed and she pointed left. This way is safe. They crawled for what felt like hours, following her guidance through the twisting maze. Every few meters, Mason could hear the faint rumble of footsteps or the whine of drone rotors. The smugglers were searching closer and closer. At one point, a beam of light cut across a vent grate, and Mason froze, holding his breath. Leary clutched his collar, her body trembling. The light passed and he exhaled. Slow, good instincts, little one. She looked up, whispering, You breathe loud for a hunter. He chuckled, trying not to make noise. When they finally reached a small chamber above the coolant bay, Mason sat back against the wall, his muscles aching. He looked down at Leary, who was sitting on his knee, her glow soft and warm. He said, You saved us back there with your metal song. She smiled a little. The first real smile he had seen. It is not song. Only feeling the metal is alive. If you listen. Mason nodded. Maybe that is why my machines always break. They never liked me. For a moment the tension faded, replaced by something quiet and human. Leary studied his face, tracing the scar near his jaw. How did you get this? She asked Mason, rubbed it absent-mindedly. Long story, firefight long ago before I quit soldier life. She frowned. So you fought in the war. Her tone carried old pain. Mason nodded. Yeah, but that war ended a long time ago. The ones who started it were gone. The ones who lived had to build something better. Leary looked down. Maybe not better for all. Before Mason could answer, a static buzz came from his comm earpiece. Station security report. All tech workers to main hall for inspection. Repeat, all workers report immediately. Mason cursed under his breath. They were closing in. Leary jumped to her feet, eyes wide. What will you do? Mason thought fast. He could not show up. If he did, they would scan him and find her. So he needed a distraction. Something that would make them think he had already left the station. He pulled up the maintenance system on his wrist console and set a false shuttle departure using his ID tag. The system confirmed launch in 30 minutes. That should buy us some time, he muttered. Leary tilted. Her head. You tricked them. Humans are clever sometimes, he said with a grin. Leary hesitated, then touched his finger gently and whispered, Thank you. Mason smiled. Don't thank me yet. We're not safe. He picked her up carefully, placing her on his shoulder again, and started crawling toward the old ventilation shafts leading to the hangar. She could hear his heartbeat, steady, strong, and for the first time in her life she began to believe that maybe not all the stories about humans were true. Maybe one of them was trying to change the ending flight through the vents. The air inside the vent tunnels was thick and dry with the taste of old metal and dust. Mason moved through it with careful patience. every motion quiet, and measured his hands dragging along the floor to steady himself as he crawled forward, his tool belt scraping faintly. Leary rode on his shoulder, one hand gripping the fabric of his jacket, the other brushing against the wall as if listening to a secret language she could sense. Every vibration, the faint hum of coolant below them, the slow pulse of machinery that kept the station alive to her. It was like being inside a giant sleeping creature. Its breath slow, its heart made of power and steam. Mason paused at a junction, where the vent forked into two directions. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and whispered which way. Leary closed her eyes, humming low and soft, the sound barely audible, but it carried through the metal. The left passage trembled faintly. The right was still. She opened her eyes and pointed right. That one is quiet, it listens better. Mason smiled. Good choice. Let us stay off the noisy paths. They crawled on the metal floor, vibrating under their knees from the distant engines, each sound magnified, until it felt like thunder in the narrow tunnel. They moved for what felt like hours until they reached a grated opening below them. Mason peeked through and saw the storage deck drones floated back and forth, scanning crates and checking seals, and between them walked the smugglers from before their leader barked orders at the drones. Find the missing cargo. The human has it somewhere. Check the logs again. Mason ducked back, his jaw tightening. Leary whispered, They will find us if we stay, Mason. Nodded, we have to keep ahead, but there is a shortcut near here. He pointed down the vent line. This one leads toward the coolant bay. From there we can reach the hangar if we are lucky. They crawled on, but the sound of a drone buzzing behind them made Mason freeze. He looked back and saw the faint red glow of a scanning light closing fast. He muttered, Go. Leary scurried forward, her small body fast and graceful. She reached the next junction and waved him on. Mason followed as fast as his big frame allowed. The drone clanged against the vent walls behind them, its propellers whining, the noise echoing like a swarm of angry bees. Mason cursed under his breath, pulled his wrench from his belt, and as the drone came around the corner, he slammed the wrench into its lens. The impact sparked blue light and smoke. The drone fell clattering into silence. Leary covered her ears, the sound painful for her small body. Mason turned, panting. Sorry, little one. She looked up at him, eyes wide and glowing. You fight machines with metal fists, he grinned. Habit from my soldier days, but I prefer fixing things these days. Leary tilted her head. You are strange. Mason nodded. Yeah, I get that a lot. Come on, we can't stop now. They kept moving until they reached a section where the tunnel grew wider and the air colder. A low mist hung in the space below the grates. Mason looked down and saw the swirling vapors of the coolant bay. The vast chamber glittered with frostlight reflecting off pipes like icy rivers. He found a small hatch and kicked it open, climbing down a ladder with Leary clinging tight to his jacket. When they reached the floor, she jumped off and looked around. The space was quiet, filled with the deep rumble of coolant pumps. Mason took a deep breath and leaned against a pipe, his muscles aching. Leary touched one of the pipes and whispered softly, It is alive, but tired. Mason smiled. Everything here is tired, even me. Leary laughed, a small, soft laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Mason looked at her with a grin. First time I heard you laugh, little one. She blushed, faint green light glowing on her cheeks. Laughter is not for fear, she said. Mason looked up at the ceiling where frost glittered like stars. You know, you remind me of someone, a friend from my old crew. She used to say people are just machines that need the right tune. Leary blinked, confused, and asked, What is tune? Mason smiled. Music, sound, rhythm. Something that makes the heart calm. Maybe you have it better then. As Leary placed her hand on his arm and said, Maybe you do not listen enough. The moment held between them like still air before a storm. Then a sharp sound echoed through the bay, the metallic click of a door opening. Mason grabbed his wrench and motioned. For silence, voices drifted in, muffled but clear enough. The smugglers had found their way down to the coolant level. Leary whispered, They are coming. Mason nodded, his eyes scanning for escape routes. The vents above were too high, the door was blocked, but there was an old service bridge crossing the bay. He pointed there. We go that leads toward the hangar. It is risky, but better than getting caught. He scooped Leary into his pocket and ran his boots clanging against the frozen walkway each step, echoing like a drumbeat. Behind them the smugglers shouted, "There he is, get him." Mason ran faster, slipping on the frost. The bridge swayed under his weight. One of the smugglers fired a stun bolt. It hit the railing and sparks flew. Leary peeked out her, voice trembling. "They will catch us." Mason gritted his teeth. "Not if I can help it." He reached the end of the bridge and kicked a control panel. The door refused to open. System override needed. The smugglers were almost on them. Leary jumped onto the panel, pressing her small hand against the access port. Her glow brightened and she began humming a soft, low tone. The metal around her shimmered and the lock clicked green. The door opened with a hiss. Mason stared in shock. "How did you do that?" She said simply. "The metal listens, I just asked." Mason smiled. "You are something else, little one." They rushed through the door and slammed it shut behind them, locking it manually. The sound of fists pounding echoed from the other side. Mason leaned back. Breathing hard, Leary climbed onto his shoulder again. "You are bleeding," she said, pointing to a cut on his hand. He shrugged. "It is nothing." She frowned. "Humans always say that." They walked down a corridor that led to a small hangar storage room. The smell of oil and ozone hung thick. Mason peeked through a small window and saw a ship waiting, a transport shuttle ready for maintenance. If they could get inside, maybe they could leave the station or at least hide for a while, but as he turned back to tell Leary, a red warning flashed on the wall hanger. "Lockdown, unauthorized entry detected." Leary gasped. "They found us." Mason tightened his jaw and looked around the small room full of tools and machinery. He whispered, "Not yet, they haven't. We can still fight." He began moving crates, stacking them near the door, creating a barrier while Leary climbed onto a console, scanning for alternate exits. She pointed to a vent line running above the maintenance bay. "It goes to the shuttle bay," she said, "but it is small." Mason looked at it and shook his head. "Too small for me. Maybe not for you." Leary hesitated, understanding what he meant. "You want me to go alone?" Mason nodded. "You can fit inside the shuttle systems and open it from within." She looked at him, scared. "If they catch you." Mason smiled. "Then you better hurry, because I am not good at losing." She took a deep breath, climbed into the vent and vanished into the dark. Mason turned back toward the door, sound of metal boots echoing closer. He gripped his wrench, ready for whatever came next, while deep inside the vents, Leary crawled through the maze, guided by the faint pulse of the ship's heart. She whispered to herself, "Not all humans are monsters. Not all songs are sad," and for the first time since she had been taken, she felt the rhythm of courage. Fire test and first contact, truth. The hangar lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the metal floor as Mason pressed his back against a crate, his breath steady. His eyes sharp, he could hear the smugglers moving in the corridor, their boots scraping against the grating. Above, the hum of machinery echoed through the wide room, and somewhere behind those sounds was the faint mechanical rhythm of the shuttle's system, still waiting for someone to bring it to life in the vents above. Tiny hands moved swiftly. Leary crawled through the narrow passage, the walls cold against her arms, her glow faint enough to stay hidden. She whispered softly to herself, words of focus. The metal carried her whisper down the path, guiding her toward the shuttle core. She could feel its heartbeat, faster than the rest, alive but bound. She reached a small junction where a cable cluster branched into the shuttle's access panel, and she pressed her hand against it, humming low. The hum of her kind was not just sound. It was emotion. It was a way of asking permission. The ship trembled faintly under her touch, as if recognizing her. She smiled and whispered thank you and began pulling wires with care, each spark lighting her face like golden fire below her. Mason crouched low, his wrench in hand, watching the hangar doors as the smugglers began forcing the locks open. He had maybe a minute before they poured in. He glanced toward the ceiling, hoping Leary was still safe, and whispered to himself, "Hang in there, little one." A door clanged open and the lead smuggler stepped through his armor, dusty, his face half shadowed by a mask behind him. Two others carried stun rifles. Mason rolled from behind the crate and threw his wrench. It clanged against the floor, drawing their eyes. He darted left, diving behind a service cart. A bolt sizzled through the air, striking sparks off a panel. He grabbed a loose power cable and jammed it into a console, sending a burst of light through the hangar. The sudden glare blinded the smugglers for a second, enough time for him to lunge forward and tackle one to the ground. They wrestled Mason's strength overpowering the smaller man, but a rifle butt slammed into his shoulder, sending pain shooting down his arm. Erie could hear the chaos below, the vibrations of the fight moving through the ship's skin. She worked faster, twisting wires and bridging connections, her song rising in tone. The engines coughed, a puff of vapor escaped from the thrusters. The shuttle was waking. Mason shoved the smuggler aside and ducked behind a crate again, his chest heaving. He heard the hum of engines and grinned. "Good girl," he muttered under his breath. The smugglers shouted orders, trying to figure out what was happening above them. A panel burst open, and Leary slid out onto the shuttle's control deck. Her wings buzzing faintly, she landed on the activation switch and pressed her hands flat against the metal, singing louder. This time the engines roared fully to life, and the sudden vibration threw the smugglers off balance. Mason saw his chance. He ran forward, grabbing one of the men by the collar and slamming him into the wall. The third one raised his weapon, but Mason kicked the barrel aside and punched him across the jaw, sending him sprawling. The roar of the engines drowned out their shouts. Mason reached the control panel near the floor and hit the lockdown button, sealing the hangar doors behind them. He looked up at the shuttle, the lights flickering through its windows, and saw a tiny silhouette glowing like a star in the dark. Leary was standing at the console, her arms spread, singing as if commanding the machine. He climbed up into the shuttle and found her standing beside the control board, her glow fading from exhaustion. She looked at him with tired eyes. "It listened to me," she whispered. Mason smiled and crouched beside her. "You did great, little one. The shuttle is ours now." But before they could rest, the sound of heavy boots echoed again, this time louder and more disciplined. Not smugglers, security troops. The door to the hangar slid open and the officer in charge stepped through, his uniform neat, his badge gleaming and his expression cold. Mason froze. He knew that face, Lieutenant Rask, head of security, a man with more greed than loyalty. Rask surveyed the wreckage and smirked. "You have made quite a mess, Tech," he said calmly. Mason stood tall, hiding Leary behind a panel. These smugglers were trafficking living beings. Rask shrugged. "Unfortunate, but not my concern. You are under arrest for assault and sabotage." Mason felt his anger burn. He opened his mouth to argue, but Leary stepped forward, her tiny voice ringing clear through the hangar. "He saved me." Her words made Rask blink. The troops behind him shifted uneasily. Rask sneered. "What is this, a toy?" Mason clenched his fists. "She is not a toy. She is alive, and your men have been selling her people as food." Rask laughed, a cold, short laugh. "Food, exotic delicacies, command, pays well for them. You should have stayed quiet. Tech, now both of you will be recycled." Mason's jaw tightened. He knew. What that meant. Recycled was code for disposal. Rask signaled his men to move in. Mason reached down, grabbing a fallen rifle, and leveled it at the officer. "Back off." Rask smiled, still confident. "You won't shoot." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not, but she might." He nodded toward the console. Leary's glow brightened again. The ship's engines began to hum louder, their pitch rising. Rask's smile faltered. Leary sang once more, the tone sharp and high. The lights in the hangar flickered violently, every metal surface vibrating as if alive. Rask shouted to cut power, but the control systems were overridden. Mason used the distraction to lunge forward, grabbing Rask by the collar and pinning him against the wall. He shouted, "You are done. This station is not your market anymore." The troops hesitated, unsure whether to follow orders or their conscience, and in that hesitation, Mason hit the broadcast switch on the shuttle's external comm. Every word, every image streamed across the station, screens showing the tiny prisoners, the smugglers, the corruption. All over the decks, workers froze at their posts, watching in silence as the truth poured out. Rask screamed for the feed to be cut, but it was too late. Mason turned to him, eyes hard. He wanted to sell people for profit. Now the whole station knows. Rask broke free, pushing him back toward the controls. But before he could fire, Leary darted forward, wings buzzing, and bit down on the officer's gloved finger, her glow flaring bright. His gun went off, hitting the ceiling as Mason tackled him again. They crashed against the metal floor. Mason's fist slammed once, twice. Then silence. Rask lay unconscious, his troops lowering their weapons. Leary hovered near Mason's shoulder, trembling. From the effort, she looked at him and whispered softly, "Did we win?" Mason looked around the chaos, the hangar full of smoke alarms blaring. But for the first time in a long while, he smiled. "Maybe not yet, but we are close." He turned toward the broadcast console again, ready to send one more message when a shadow moved near the far door. A new figure stepping in, the station commander herself, her expression unreadable. She looked at the scene, at Mason, at Leary, at the fallen officer, and said quietly, "I think it is time someone heard your side of the story." Mason nodded, still catching his breath, while Leary landed on his palm, her wings folding gently, her voice quiet but steady. "We only wanted freedom." The commander looked at her with strange respect, then back at Mason. "Perhaps this station has forgotten what it means to be human, and maybe it took someone small to remind us." Mason met her gaze and nodded. "Maybe so, but it is not over yet, because the people who started this will not give up easily." The commander sighed. "You may be right, but for now we have truth, and truth has its own kind of fire." As the alarms echoed through the metal corridors and the hangar filled with smoke and light, Mason stood with Leary on his shoulder, the tiny alien, who once feared he would devour her, now shining like a beacon beside him. Together they had struck the first spark in a war of justice that would soon engulf the station and beyond. Human stubbornness shows. The alarm screamed across the station, in long metallic wails that made the air vibrate, while Mason stood in the hangar, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. But his mind sharper than ever. The shuttle's engines had powered down. The smoke hung thick around him, and the small, alien girl perched on his shoulder, her glow dimmed but her spirit bright. Mason looked around the chaos, the unconscious officer on the floor, the silent troops unsure whether to act or to listen, and then the voice of the commander broke the tension. "Enough, this madness stops here," she said with calm steel in her voice. Her eyes moved between Mason and the glowing creature on his shoulder. "Tell me everything, before the rest of the station tears itself apart." Mason nodded and started talking. He told her how he had found Leary in a crate, how the smugglers had tried to reclaim her, how the station's own security had been involved in selling living beings for profit, and how the truth had been broadcast to every screen across Orion Station. The commander listened without a word, her face unreadable as he spoke behind her. The troops exchanged uneasy glances. The sound of distant shouts echoed from the corridors. The feed was still playing on the public channels, and the workers were beginning to move. The whole station was waking up. Leary looked at the commander and spoke, her voice trembling yet clear. "Humans hunted my people long ago. We were told you eat us, but he did not eat me. He saved me." Her words silenced the room. The commander took a long breath and said quietly, "History has sharp teeth, child, I believe you." Mason stepped forward. "So what now, Commander? We both know Rask will have friends higher up, ones who will not like this going public." She nodded. "Yes, and if they cut the main feed, they can twist the story before it spreads." Mason shook his head. "Not if we move first." He went to the console and started typing, his hands flying across the keys, his mind running through systems maps and bypass codes he had used for years to patch broken machinery. Now he used them to open every comm channel on the station. The commander frowned. "You will start a riot." Mason glanced up, maybe. But sometimes that is what it takes. Leary's glow brightened faintly, and she placed her hand on the console, her energy flowing into the circuits. The connection stabilized and the feed went live again. The entire station filled with Mason's voice. "This is Mason Grady, cargo tech of Orion Station. You have seen the truth. We were lied to by those who sold others as food or toys. The small ones are not things, they are people, and I will not let their screams be hidden any longer. The smugglers are part of this. So are the ones who took bribes to keep quiet. If you believe in what humans should stand for, then help us stop them right now." Across the decks, people paused. Workers, engineers, pilots, cooks. The broadcast cut through the static of fear and routine. In the hydroponic bay, a mechanic named Henson shut off his loader and said quietly, "He fixed my oxygen lines last month. He is a good man in the reactor room." A team leader nodded and began locking the access hatches across the docking corridors. Maintenance crews shut down, elevators, security drones went offline. One by one, the station's beating heart slowed, not by order, but by will, the human will to protect, not destroy, the kind of stubborn kindness that could turn a quiet worker into a hero. Back in the hangar, the commander watched the indicators blink, red across the system grid. She said, "You have the entire workforce behind you now, but that also means you have made enemies of the upper decks." Mason smirked. "Story of my life." He glanced at Leary, who sat on the console, her wings fluttering softly. She said in her gentle tone, "Humans are strange. You break your own order to build something better." He laughed. "That is what we do best." Suddenly the lights flickered, and the commander's wrist device beeped a deep alarm code. She looked up, her expression grim. "They cut the power from the control core and rerouted it to purge the hangar in 2 minutes. This deck will vent into space." Mason's heart skipped. He turned to Leary, who was already listening to the hum of the walls. She said quietly, "I can stop it, but I must reach the relay." He looked where she pointed, a narrow maintenance crawl running under the hangar floor. It was barely wide enough for her small body. Mason dropped to one knee, looking her in the eye. "You are sure?" She nodded her. "Glow steady. Trust me, I hear where it breaks." Mason helped her down toward the grate, and she slipped inside, crawling fast. Her fingers brushing against warm pipes, sparks flickering around her. She could hear the pulse of the power lines like angry veins. Mason watched from above, shouting directions through the comm link. "Keep right at the junction," Leary answered. I know. She reached the relay node and saw the broken link, a melted connection that could only be bridged manually. She touched the copper pin and felt it burn her hands, but she kept going, singing softly. The vibration spread through the circuits. The hum of the hangar shifted from rising chaos to calm balance. The commander looked at her monitor. The purge timer froze, then reversed, systems stabilizing. Mason exhaled and laughed through relief. She did it. He shouted. The commander allowed herself a rare smile. "Perhaps we owe our lives to something smaller than courage." Mason grinned. "Or maybe that is exactly what courage looks like." Leary crawled back out, her arms shaking, her tiny hands blackened from the heat. He caught her, gently wrapping her in a strip of cloth. She whispered weakly, "The metal listened to me." Mason smiled and said, "And it listened well." The lights returned, but the peace did not last. The comm crackled with static. Then a cold voice spoke through every speaker on the deck. "This is Director Halloran. All personnel stand down immediately. The accused will surrender the creature to Central Command. Any who disobey will be charged with mutiny." The commander clenched her fists. Halloran was one of the investors behind the station, a man powerful enough to silence worlds. Mason looked at the small alien in his hand and said quietly, "If he gets you, he will finish what the smugglers started." The commander turned to him. "We cannot fight his fleet with tools and courage alone." Mason's jaw tightened. "Maybe not, but we can show the whole sector what he is doing before he shuts us down." He pulled a small drive from his pocket and handed it to Leary. "This has everything, the recordings, the logs, the names. If you can get this to the outer comm tower, someone will hear it." Leary blinked up at him. "But that tower is outside the shield. It is death." Mason smiled. "Not for you, little one. You are small enough to fly through the gaps." The commander stepped forward. "Mason, if you do this, you will have to hold the hangar against his troops long enough for her to reach the tower." He nodded. "Stubbornness is kind of my thing." Leary climbed onto his shoulder again, her voice trembling. "You will not leave me," he said. "I will not if I can help it. Now go when I say." She nodded and held the drive close against her chest. Mason turned to the commander. "Ready? I will buy her time." The commander nodded, grim but proud. Outside the hangar, the sound of marching boots echoed like thunder. The director's private guards moving in, armored and armed. Mason tightened his grip on his wrench, feeling the familiar heat of adrenaline. His thoughts sharpened into focus. He looked at Leary one last time and said softly, Time to show them what humans are made of. She smiled, glowing brighter than ever, and whispered, "And what friends can be made of together?" They stood as the doors began, to open the storm coming to swallow them, but neither looked away because human stubbornness was not just about refusing to fall. It was about standing for someone else, even when the sky itself tried to crush you. The unexpected turn. The hangar doors groaned open with a thunderous roar, and the cold light of the upper decks poured in like a flood of white fire. Mason stood firm at the center of the metal floor, his wrench gripped tight in one hand, his knuckles pale, his breath calm, though his heart hammered in his chest. Beside his boot lay the broken helmets of the smugglers, and near the wall, the commander typed frantic commands into the terminal, trying to keep the defense grid active. Leary perched on his shoulder, small and radiant, her glow faint but determined. She could feel his heartbeat beneath the fabric of his jacket, fast but steady, and she whispered softly, "They come." Mason nodded. "They always do." Through the open door marched the director's private guards, their armor black as oil and their helmets gleaming with silver stripes. Each carried a plasma rifle. The sound of their synchronized boots filled the hangar like thunder. At their head strode Director Halloran, tall, lean, and calm, his eyes like glass and his voice smooth enough to cut steel. "You have caused quite a spectacle, Mr. Grady. Your little performance has reached the entire outer sector." Mason said nothing, his jaw tight. Halloran smiled coldly. "I could have offered you a fine retirement, a quiet life. Instead, you throw it away for a creature the size of a thumb." Mason's gaze hardened. "For someone who calls himself human, you know very little about being one." The soldiers raised their weapons. Leary tensed her wings, flicking in fear. Mason gently tapped her side, a silent promise of protection. The commander stood beside them, her voice sharp. "Halloran, this ends now. The whole station has seen your crimes. You cannot silence them all." Halloran laughed, a deep, empty sound. "Watch me." With one hand, he raised a small control device and pressed it. The floor shuddered, the lights flickered, and the sound of systems crashing echoed through the hangar. Mason realized what he had done. He had triggered the central override, the same command that could purge every deck if needed. Leary gasped, her small hands clutching his collar. Mason looked down at her, her glow pulsing with panic. The entire station hummed under their feet as power rerouted through the lower cores. Halloran spoke again, calm and cruel. "The station will purge itself of contamination. Your little rebellion, your creature, your friends, all gone in 2 minutes." Mason clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Leary's small voice broke through the chaos. "There is still the outer comm tower," she whispered. "If we reach it, I can send the message before it burns." Mason nodded, "Then run." Now she hesitated. "What about you?" He smiled. "Someone has to keep him busy." Before she could protest, he plucked her gently from his shoulder and placed her on the ground near the open vent leading to the shuttle systems. "Go. Little one, fly through the ducts, reach the tower, and sing your truth." Leary looked up, her eyes glowing bright. She wanted to argue, but she saw something. In his face, unbreakable resolve and pain. She whispered softly, "I will come back." Mason grinned, "I am counting on it." Then she turned and vanished into the vent, her glow disappearing into the darkness. Halloran saw the movement and shouted, "Stop her!" But before his troops could react, Mason charged forward like a storm, swinging his wrench into the first rifle, shattering it in sparks and smoke. He slammed his shoulder into another guard, sending him sprawling. Plasma bolts lit the air, turning the hangar into a storm of light and fire. Mason moved like a machine of pure will, ducking under blasts, throwing tools, grabbing cables. The commander fired from behind cover, shouting orders to the few loyal workers who had joined them. They fought, not for rank or money, but for truth, and the idea that humanity was meant to protect, not consume. Meanwhile, inside the vents, Leary crawled faster than she ever had before, her hands scraping metal, her wings folded tight behind her, the vibrations of the battle below echoing through her bones. She whispered to the metal guiding her way, "Show me the safe path." The station listened, its hum shifting, and she followed the warmth of current that led upward. She reached the relay junction, a small shaft leading to the outer comm tower. but the heat from the power reroute was intense. Sweat gleamed on her green skin and her tiny lungs burned. She gritted her teeth, thinking of Mason, his courage, his promise, and she kept moving. Back in the hangar, Halloran moved closer, each step measured, his voice still calm. You cannot win Grady. Even if the creature sends a message, they will not believe her. Mason laughed through gritted teeth. Maybe not, but they will believe what they see. He kicked over a console, and sparks flew, the security feed flashing to show the battle live across every deck. Workers saw their fellow humans fighting beside the glowing alien girl's friend. They saw courage, not conquest. Halloran's sneer faltered. He raised his pistol, aiming at Mason, but before he could fire, the commander stepped out from cover, her own weapon drawn enough Halloran drop it. Halloran turned his aim toward her instead, his eyes cold and calculating, but Mason threw himself between them. The bolt hit, his shoulder spinning him backward. Pain exploded through his arm. He fell but pushed himself back up, blood dripping down his sleeve. Halloran stared in disbelief at the man who refused to fall. Mason's voice came ragged but strong. You can destroy systems, you can purge decks, but you will never break what makes us human. Halloran's hand trembled for the first time, rage twisting his face up in the tower. Leary reached the final hatch. It was sealed with an old code. She pressed her hands against the surface and began to hum. Her song rising pure and fierce, the lock trembled, the light within it turning gold. The metal itself seemed to melt open, and she slipped through the small gap. She found herself inside the comm tower, a glass dome overlooking, the void stars burning like distant promises below her. The station glowed red from alarms. She climbed onto the control board and placed the drive Mason had given her into the slot, whispering softly to it, "Carry his truth across the stars." The console lit up, data streams flooding the system. Her voice joined the digital pulse, a song that carried both code and emotion. Her melody mixed with Mason's recordings and the station's visual feeds. The signal stretched beyond the local network into the relay satellites, broadcasting across human space for the first time in centuries. The story of the small people and their suffering reached the worlds of men, and with it, the sight of one human who had stood against greed down below Halloran's. Device beeped. Failure override blocked. The purge had been stopped. His eyes widened. He shouted, "What did you do?" Mason grinned, bleeding. But standing, she did what you never could. She told the truth. The commander raised her weapon. "Enough, Halloran. You are finished." But Halloran lunged forward in desperation, slamming the device into the control console. It sparked wildly. Alarm screamed again. Mason realized what he had done. The device was rigged with explosives. Halloran snarled, "If I cannot have this station, no one will." Mason grabbed him by the arm, wrestling for control. The two men struggled, their feet sliding across the blood-smeared floor. Halloran's face twisted in hatred, Mason's in grim determination. Leary could feel the vibrations. Even from the tower, she turned to look through the glass and saw a small flash of light from the hangar. Her heart clenched. She whispered no, and began to run back through the vents. The signal still transmitting behind her, carrying her song of truth across the galaxy in the hangar. Mason forced Halloran's hand down, slamming the device to the floor and kicking it away. But the timer was already ticking red. He shouted to the commander, "Get everyone out." She hesitated. "Not without you." He shook his head. "Go now," she obeyed, rallying the remaining crew toward the upper exit. Mason turned and ran toward the device, his eyes catching the shimmer of the stars through the open hangar door. He thought of Leary, the tiny alien who had once feared. He would eat her and now might save 1,000 lives with her voice. He picked up the bomb, his hands shaking from pain and fire. He ran toward the outer airlock, knowing there was only one place it could explode without taking the station with it. Outside in the endless dark of space, his breath came steady. His mind quiet, he whispered into the calm Leary, "If you can hear me, keep singing. Do not stop." And then the explosion lit the stars like a second dawn, a silent wave of fire expanding across the void and vanishing into dust. The hangar shook as shockwaves rippled through the hull. Alarms screamed again, but this time their sound was different, less frantic, more confused. The commander grabbed the nearest console, shouting status reports. Over the roar of falling debris, Power fluctuations rippled across every deck, but the core remained stable. The purge command was gone, neutralized by the blast. Mason's sacrifice had saved them all. Inside the comm tower, Leary clung to the glass, trembling, the afterglow of the explosion reflected in her golden eyes. Her tiny body shook not from fear, but from the ache of loss. The hum of the station quieted to a heavy stillness. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering his name. Mason. No answer came, only the distant hiss of cooling metal. But through that silence she heard something else. The soft rhythm of the station's heartbeat, steady, alive. She wiped her tears and whispered softly, "You did not vanish. You became the light that saved them." The signal she had sent kept echoing outward through the relay satellites beyond the asteroid belt, beyond human trade routes and out toward colonies and frontier worlds where screens flickered to life, showing the same story, the image of a small alien girl standing beside a human who refused to surrender. Every broadcast carried the same message: the human did not devour her. He saved her. And because of that, the stars themselves began to listen. Back on Orion Station, chaos turned to order as crews rushed to repair the hangar bulkheads. The commander moved among them, her voice steady and firm, directing teams with quiet authority. But in her eyes, there was a weight, a grief mixed with pride. Leary landed on her shoulder. Her glow faint from exhaustion, the commander turned to her. "You should rest, little one." Leary shook her head softly. "I must see the place where he fell." The commander hesitated, then nodded gently. "Come with me." They walked through the broken corridors, past burned panels and scattered tools until they reached the airlock Mason had used. The glass was cracked and scorched by the blast outside, through the transparent barrier. The stars stretched, endless and cold. Leary floated up to the glass, pressing her hand against it. The warmth of her touch left a faint glow like a tiny sun. She closed her eyes and began to hum a soft, low song that vibrated through the chamber. Not of sorrow, but of gratitude. It was the sound of her people's way of saying farewell, and in that song the station's metal seemed to hum back its tones, aligning into harmony. The commander watched silently, tears glinting in her eyes when the song ended. Leary landed softly on the railing, her voice steady. "He wanted to fix broken things now. He fixed all of us." The commander nodded. Maybe he did, and maybe he fixed something bigger too. Days passed and the story spread. The outer colonies sent transmissions offering support. Protests rose on the capital worlds demanding justice for the small races. The smugglers' network was exposed one by one. Their ships seized their leaders, arrested. The name Mason Grady became a symbol of defiance of the old human, saying that strength meant mercy, not domination. And on Orion, station life slowly found rhythm again. Leary became a bridge between worlds. She helped the commander open talks with her people's surviving clans, using the comm channels Mason had repaired before his final mission. Her song translated into codes and pulses that carried across systems. Soon fleets began to arrive, not of war, but of alliance. Human engineers and alien artisans working side by side to build something new. The first joint habitat for humans and small folk carved into the station's lower decks filled with light and green growth. In one corner of that new habitat stood a small workshop, once Mason's repair bay, now transformed into a memorial, but not of marble or steel. It was alive with color. Tiny sculptures built by Leary's, kinmetal vines winding through them like roots of unity. At the center stood his old wrench, polished to mirror shine, engraved with words chosen by Leary. He fixed what was broken and taught the stars to listen. Everyday visitors came to that workshop, humans and small folk alike, and every night, Leary would perch near the glowing wrench and tell the story again, not as tragedy, but as truth. She told of how a human found her in a crate of fear and gave her sugar instead. Of chains, how he fought for her when his own kind turned against him, and how in the end he carried a star in his hands to save them all. Children of both species listened, their eyes wide. Some asked if Mason would come back, and she always smiled softly and said, "Humans do not disappear. They echo in the hearts they touch." One evening, as the station drifted quietly around its orbit, Leary flew to the observation deck alone. The stars stretched across the black like rivers of silver she sat on, the rail humming to herself, the same melody she had sung in the hangar long ago. The metal beneath her vibrated faintly. She could feel the pulse of the station, the rhythm Mason had kept alive. She smiled softly. "You are still here," she whispered. "I can hear you in the machines and the lights, in the quiet laughter of your kind." Behind her footsteps approached the commander, who now walked slower, older, perhaps, but wiser. She stood beside Leary, gazing at the stars. "They say the message you sent. Reach the council," she said. "Humanity has declared protection for your people. No more hunting, no more fear." Leary turned to her, glowing faintly. "Thank you, but it was not my song alone. It was his courage." The commander nodded. "Perhaps it was both his and yours, and together that is what made the galaxy listen." The two stood in silence for a while, watching the slow rotation of distant worlds, until Leary broke the quiet with a gentle smile. "We will build something new here, an embassy not of humans, or small folk, but of both." The commander smiled. "I think Mason would like that." Leary's wings fluttered softly. "I know he would, because that is what humans do. They fix broken things, and what my people do, we help them remember how to listen." Outside, the window, a small repair drone drifted past, its light blinking softly. Its identification code flashing: MGR-01 Mason Grady Repair Unit. The commander chuckled quietly. "Looks like even the machines remember him." Leary watched the little drone vanish into the stars and whispered softly, "Thank you, Mason, for showing us that monsters are just stories and heroes are made of kindness." As the station lights dimmed into night cycle, Leary sang one last time a song that carried through every corridor, through every beam and bolt, a song that blended human melody and alien harmony into one voice, the song of hope, the song of unity, and as it echoed through the metal, it reached far beyond Orion Station, into the endless dark between stars where, perhaps somewhere, Mason's spirit listened with a grin and whispered back, "Good job, little one, keep the fire burning."